The Ducati Desert X is another adventure bike that seemed to be a long time coming, but now it's here. Have Ducati delivered? Now, there are obviously quite a few reviews of this bike already out there, and they do all seem to be very positive. So before I get into the riding, let's just tick off some of the technical specs. The Desert X features the well-known 937cc L-twin Desmodronic engine, and in this, guys, it puts out 110 horsepower at 9,250 revs and 92 newton meters of torque at 6,500 revs. It has been reworked. This engine is 1.7 kilograms lighter than its predecessor, and it has been tuned specifically for this bike. So it's not just a mapping change that goes on with the difference between these engines and the various models. This bike has got a reworked cam. There's a different cam profile. They've also shortened first and second gear, which is obviously much more suitable for off-road riding. The bike weighs it in at 202 kilos dry, and if you fill this 21 litre fuel tank to the brim, that brings the curb weight to 223 kilos. Now, as you can see with me standing in front of it, it is quite a tall bike. The seat height as standard is 865 millimeters. This seat is non-adjustable. It is what it is. There is a low seat option, and you can have a low seat option with a slightly lowered suspension setup, which brings that seat height down to 845. Alternatively, if you're a tall bugger, then you can get a high seat option, and that takes the seat height up to 890. It is obviously then quite a tall bike, but that's going to be the same for any adventure bike that's set up to ride off-road. You need that ground clearance, you need that suspension travel, which incidentally from the KYB shocks gives you 230 millimeters of travel on the front and 220 of the rear, but that tall bike is just what comes with the territory. In the UK, the bike retails at £14,795. That's quite a lot of money to spend on a bike, but it does have quite a lot of features on it. For example, it does have a up and down quick shifter as standard, and that has been excellent, and I'll talk about that more in the ride review. There is a slipper clutch, which is hydraulically operated. There's nice little touches such as the adjustable brake pedal, so you can pull that out, rotate it and move it into a higher position. Easily done. For this style of bike, it is admittedly a little bit more expensive than its competition, but as I've found with every Ducati, the fit and finish, the quality of the componentry is top class. For example, they'll use Brembo monoblock radial calipers on here, which have got great feel and lots of power. And when you look around, just everything on the bike is really nicely done. That exhaust sounds great. But it's also very slim and very small, and just lots of touches on this bike that ooze quality. Fuel economy is pretty good too. Now, Ducati state 5.6 litres per 100 kilometres, and that equates to roughly 50 miles per gallon. And I would say that you've got no problem on hitting those figures. I think they're actually pretty realistic. I filled it up and I've just about got to my last kind of single digit mile range, and I've covered over 230 miles, and so I think they're spot on with those numbers. Now, servicing costs are going to be pretty much the same for any of the Ducati bikes with this motor. The service intervals are pretty good. You've got an oil service every 9,000 miles, and you'll have a Desmo valve check at 18,000 miles. One point that has been raised quite a few times in my YouTube community page: to get to the air filter, you need to take the tank off. It's not the only bike in this kind of class where you have to do that, but on a bike that's aimed more at rugged off-roading, some people do see that as a problem. I'm going to have it serviced by a Ducati dealer to maintain my warranty. So at least for the first 2 years, they can deal with changing the air filter. And I think most owners are not going to bother doing that themselves. But I do take the point that if you live or ride in dusty conditions, and this is a bike that is designed to munch miles across deserts, into Morocco, through America, you know, wherever it may be, if you want to be able to pull your filter out, blow the air out, or change that filter, that is problematic on this bike. One thing that does stand out about the Desert X is the electronics package. It is pretty comprehensive, and I'll talk more about the riding modes and how they work in the riding section of this video. But as well as those riding modes, there's also the opportunity for some good multimedia connectivity. So if you go for the multimedia system, you can have things like turn-by-turn navigation on this very good TFT screen. And if you look at other accessories, then you've got the usual things like heated grips. They don't come as standard, despite the fact that there is a button on the control. So they probably could have included that, because it's not really that much for Ducati to add into the package. There's also an option to fit an auxiliary fuel tank. It takes 8 litres of fuel. So that means you've got 21 litres in this tank. You can have a further 8 litres in the back. And if you're running low, you can just switch that on like a reserve tank. Okay, so let's start where I normally always start, and that's ergonomics. And the first thing you notice when you jump onto this bike is just how slim it is. And obviously the styling of this bike is very reminiscent of the old Cagiva Elephant, and it's all the better for it. I think it's one of the better looking adventure bikes out there on the marketplace. This very narrow pointy Dakar style screen all leads it to feeling slim and very nimble, and it does feel very nimble. Straight away you'll notice the suspension is plush, but it feels very manoeuvrable, very quick to turn, despite that 21-inch front wheel. I would say actually on first ride it felt very similar to the Touareg 660. Same kind of feel. The bars were initially, I thought, a little bit far away, but actually once I've been riding it for a while, that was just the adjustment from my bike. The bars are a nice height, whether you're seated or standing. Controls are really nice. Once you've got used to this Ducati system of clicking in your modes and moving things around, then that's no problem at all, though I'm still at the moment struggling to work out how to get it down onto the trip meter to change it. But I'm sure I'll work that out eventually. The display is very good. They've gone for this kind of, again, Dakar style tall upright screen. One thing I have noticed about that screen is obviously very clear, very functional, and you've got loads of ability to change that in terms of how you want it viewed. So for the example, I've got his showing the range. I've just filled up. It's showing me a range of 236 miles. I can change that to have a little bar chart as well that shows how empty or full the tank is. I can see it very easily here when I'm standing. I can still read that display really easily. So it shows that there has been quite a bit of thought that has gone into that. I'll talk about the screen as well, because this is the standard screen. It is fixed, you can't move it. It's a beautiful looking thing, a really nice screen, kind of fits in nicely with the look of the bike, and it does a pretty good job of keeping the wind off. I can hear it on this helmet. When I wore my Aero Commander peaked helmet, when I picked it up, I was getting a little bit of buzz on the peak. Nothing much, but when I put my new AGV Tour modular helmet, and I'll bring a review of that fairly soon, it was very quiet. So it's easy to say, well, the screen's noisy and it's not that great. It just is a luck of a draw, depending on how tall you are and what helmet you're wearing, as to how that performs. The seats are pretty comfortable. I'm, as I say, 5'10", 32 inside leg, and I can't really flat foot this. I'm kind of on the balls of my feet. I'm pretty comfortable with that. But once you get onto rougher terrain, if you do want to paddle and put your feet down, you can be left swinging about a little bit, looking for grip. Yes, it's a very capable road machine, but predominantly this is aimed at people who want to spend more time on the dirt than they do on the tarmac. I do like this kind of matte white finish on the paint. That's beautiful. Everything is just really well engineered and really well put together, and I guess that's one of the joys of owning a Ducati. Now when it comes to electronics, there are just tons on this bike. In terms of modes, I can just flick through modes. If I press and hold that button, I'm in mode. So I'm in sport at the moment, and as you can see, within each of those modes you've got the option to tweak the traction control and the ABS and all of that business. So if you really want to go in there and mess things around, you can do. So you can see Urban's got medium power, which I think is 95 horsepower. Touring is a high power, so you get the full 110. Wet is medium, 95.
Enduro is low, so that knocks it down to 75, and rally is full. And there is a big difference, there is a noticeable difference if you put it in Enduro mode when you're off-road. I've only done a little bit of gravel work on this, but you put it in Enduro mode, everything's all nicely controlled, the throttle is nice and soft. It almost feels like you've got somebody helping you along through it. Turning to the engine now, this again is that 937 Testastretta motor. It's a really nice flexible engine. It will forgive kind of staying in higher gears, around slower corners. Pulls very nicely out of that. Fueling and the mapping is spot on. It's pretty soft off the bottom. Even in sports mode, which I'm in now, it's still a pretty sort of soft delivery of power, but it certainly doesn't hang around.
The KYB suspension is fully adjustable front and rear, and you have a remote preload adjuster for the rear shock too.
I haven't touched this at all, and I'm probably heavier than the rider that this setup was intended for, but I found it to be really nice. It's plush, but it's not wallowy, so it gives me a decent amount of smoothness over bumpy roads like this, and certainly off-road, but it still feels taut. It's priced like a Ducati. You get really good build quality, you get lots of stuff on it, but you have to pay for it. And obviously servicing costs as well, and I'm actually on my way to a Ducati dealer now to get an idea of how much that's going to cost. Here we go, Ducati. This is exactly where we need to be, so let's go and find okay, they are shut. It's 4 o'clock on a Wednesday afternoon and they're shut. Oh well, bollocks. Okay, if you want that kind of Dakar styling, and I think this is a beautiful looking bike, then it's the sort of bike that's going to appeal. This, I think, is a very accomplished road bike. You can get away with a lot on this. I've had a lot of fun riding it. You can really push it. I have to say the Pirelli Scorpion Rally STR tyres have been fantastic as well, both on wet dry tarmac and gravel. It's only when things get muddy that they start to give up a little bit. So it's comfortable, it's smooth, it's good fun to ride, it's plush. You could probably do with a little bit more weather protection. I've just got to, whilst I'm here, show you what this farm is called, because I come past it a lot and it always makes me giggle, but that's because I'm a child. Sorry, so where was I? If you want to adventure a good distance off-road into technical terrain, then this bike is going to be up for that. It's a really nice bike. It's one of those bikes that you park it up and you turn around and look back at it and think, yeah, that's a sexy bike, and there's a lot to be said for that. But on these kind of roads, well, I spend a lot of my time, it has been absolutely fantastic. It is overall a very, very good adventure bike with a more of a off-road leaning. When you wind it on, it really does kick on very nicely indeed. I don't think I'm allowed up there.
So as I alluded to at the start of the video, almost every review of this bike is very good, and it is indeed very hard to pick faults. It rides nice, the engine's great, it handles well, the electronics package is fantastic. It is a very, very good adventure bike. But there must be some negatives, right? Well, very few, and the only ones I had are niggles. Occasionally it doesn't like to start in the morning. It might take a second stab of the button to get it going. I have noticed a bit of a brake squeal, only very lightly, but I have had that. And the indicators are a little bit fussy when you want to come to switch them off, particularly if you're turning right. Again, I've had 6, 7, 8 stabs to actually switch that button off. It doesn't seem to do it so much on the left, so I don't think that's an inherent problem with the bike itself. It's just this particular one. But apart from that, very difficult to pick any negatives. The one biggest one I think that I've found is that the side stand, I think, is just a little bit too long. It could probably do with being half an inch lower. On flat ground, it still stood quite upright. If you're on anything other than flat ground, a slight amount of camber, then you do start to struggle to stand this up. So I am actually, when I've been riding it, I've been looking for places to stop where the ground on the left side of the bike slopes away slightly, so I can get a decent lean on it. Not really a massive problem, but it's the one thing that I think you will have to be careful of, particularly if you are shorter of the leg and you're on uneven ground and you're a little bit tippy-toey. Putting that stand down could potentially be a bit of a problem, but outside of that, it is a brilliant adventure bike. So I hope you've enjoyed the video. I hope you found it useful. If you have got any other questions, then leave those in the comment section down below. I did get quite a few questions on my community page, so I've done a separate video that answers each of those questions individually. And if people like that, that's something I might do for future reviews. But all that leaves me to say is until next time, thanks for watching, take care, ride safe, and I'll see you soon. Bye.
Uh-oh, gridlock. Right, this guy's obviously losing because he's outnumbered. It's 3.5 to 1. Me being the half, I've only got half the amount of wheels of the guys in front. Thank you, lady.